Hi and welcome to my channel, and in this video I'm going to talk a little about puzzle difficulty level. And one of the reasons I decided to make this video is that oftentimes you hear cubers talking about, like for instance, the 3x3 ghost cube, how it's one of the most difficult puzzles in the world, or you see certain puzzle websites with so-called ratings, where they give like 1 to 6 stars difficulty rating, or level 1 to 10, and they list a certain puzzle as like being extremely difficult, whereas in fact it's not that difficult. And for those who are not part of the Twisty puzzle world, they look at it and they see, wow, this does look so very difficult. But for those of us who are into Twisty puzzling, who collect these puzzles, who solve these puzzles, we know that the difficulty levels go far and beyond. So I'm going to go through the very, very basics, and this is based on my personal opinion. And for those who don't know, I've been solving Twisty puzzles for about 6 years, and among them I have solved some very difficult puzzles, including such as Virgo's Pentagram, the Scubicopter Plus, Curvicopter Extreme, Sun Cube, higher order Ghost Cubes, so on and so forth. So I do have a fair share of experience in order to share my opinion on the matter, even though I may not be the most expert in the area among some people out there, but I do feel I have enough experience to give my thoughts on it. So what you see before you is basically different levels of puzzles from my own collection that I set up here in order to represent certain levels of difficulty. Now, it's debatable on how exactly to break down these levels of difficulty. I find that the best way to do it is basically you have beginner, then you have certain number of levels of intermediate, like intermediate 1, intermediate 2, intermediate 3, a certain number of levels of advanced, like advanced 1, advanced 2, advanced 3. Then after advanced you have expert, then you have master, and then you have grandmaster. So if you do it this way, you have 10 levels. So let's start with the beginner level. So this here is an Ivy cube, and this is among the easiest puzzles to solve. Now, I know it's not the easiest. There are certain puzzles, like for instance the 1 by 2 by 2 cuboid, which is practically trivial. It's easier than this, but this is one of the easiest puzzles. Turns like this. Not much to solving it, no algorithms needed. It's very intuitive. Most people who pick it up could figure it out fairly easily and should be able to solve it. So I would classify this as a beginner level puzzle. Next would be 3x3 cube. Now this is typically the puzzle that most people first learn when they get into puzzling. And this does require a number of algorithms and methods and strategies to solve. So once you're first learning it, it is quite challenging. But once you get into Twisty puzzling and you solve more difficult puzzles, you see that this puzzle is actually fairly easy. So I would classify this as an example as intermediate level 1. And another thing to mention is that within these levels, if you could solve a puzzle with difficulty, it's 1 level, whereas if you could solve the puzzle easily, it pushes you 1 level up. So for example, if you struggle to solve this puzzle, this 3x3, let's say that would classify you as a level intermediate 1, for example. But if you could easily solve it, it could classify you as a level intermediate 2. Or if perhaps you're a speed cuber and you solve it extremely fast, extremely easily, all kinds of special methods, let's say intermediate 3, for example. Even though speed cubing, I would say, is a certain subcategory of its own. Moving on, so this here is a Tangram Extreme, and I would classify this as a level intermediate 2. And what this is, it's basically a cubic shape mod of a pentahedron. I think I said the name right. It's basically a 5-sided face-turning puzzle, and you can see if I turn the top and bottom layers, you have this strip. You have this strip in the middle, and then you could also make these kind of turns as well. And at first hand you look at it, it looks very, very confusing, very difficult, but the truth is, once you understand what it is and you learn the way of solving it, it's actually not too difficult to solve. So I would say if you're learning to solve this puzzle, struggling with it, that's like an intermediate level 2. If you could solve this puzzle easily, I'd say that's an intermediate level 3. Now we move on to the famous 3x3 ghost cube, which is a basically considered among the most one of the most difficult shape mods of a 3x3. So you need to turn certain layers off center, and then you could basically scramble it in all sorts of ways. And once you're first learning to solve this puzzle, it is very difficult to learn, but once you solve it enough times, it's not too difficult. It's basically, I would classify this as a level intermediate 3 if you're just learning to solve it, if you're struggling. And if you could solve this puzzle easily, I would say that's a level advanced 1. Now the next puzzle would be this one right here, and this is a ghost pyraminx, and it's not actually a ghost pyraminx, it's a ghost jinx pyraminx, which is basically a tetrahedral cube, a ghost tetrahedral cube. And this one it turns on 4 axes instead of 3. So it's actually significantly more challenging than a 3x3 ghost cube. And I have a video tutorial on this you could check out. You could see it's definitely plays around with your perspective. It's very challenging to solve. So I would say that if you're struggling to solve this puzzle, this would be a level advanced 1, whereas if you could solve this puzzle easily, that's level advanced 2. Moving on, we have this puzzle right here, which is a crazy 4x4 circle cube. And basically, the way it works is that you could see the inner portions stay fixed when you turn the outer layers, and only if you turn the inner layers then it fully turns. And basically, it's a lot more difficult to solve than a regular 4x4. Requires a whole unique method and strategies and everything. And so I would classify this, and once again, this is just my opinion, I would classify this, if you're struggling with this puzzle, just learning it, as a level advanced 2, whereas if you could solve this easily, that's a level advanced 3. Next, we have the sun cube. And the sun cube, the way it works is basically you could turn it 45 degrees, and then you could make turns like this. And this puzzle scrambles in all sorts of interesting ways, and it has internal bandaging, so this is definitely a very challenging puzzle. And I would classify this that if you're just learning it and you're struggling with it, as level advanced 3, whereas if you could solve this puzzle easily, that's an expert level. Next, we have here Virgo's pentagram. This is the most difficult puzzle I'm going to be showing you, but it's not the most difficult puzzle that exists. And basically, it's a deep cut corner turning puzzle, which turns like this. And you can see if I make a few turns, it starts to get really messed up, and it's definitely quite a challenge to solve. And so I would say that if you're struggling to solve this, but you can solve it, that's an expert level. Whereas if you could solve this easily, that's a master level right there. Now, there are other puzzles out there which are even more difficult, for which I just don't have in my collection, such as, for instance, Aiton's Nebula, which is like Aiton's Star, except it's like a master version. Then you have Eye of Horus, which is a hybrid puzzle of a Radio Cube 3 and a Cube Ultimate. And then you have like Harvey's Jammed Terraminx and Petaminx, which are Petaminxes and Terraminxes that are bandaged and also extremely difficult to solve. And then you have Hysteria, which is a Tetradialarian, and a Pentultimate, which is very similar to Eye of Horus, just shaped as a tetrahedron. So these kind of puzzles, even if you're able to solve it once, if you're struggling with it, I would classify those as a master level. Whereas if you could solve those easily, and I can't imagine that anyone could really solve those easily, but if you could solve those easily, that's a grandmaster level right there. There's also theoretical puzzles which as of yet don't exist, or at least I'm not aware of their existence, which I would classify as grandmaster level even if you're struggling to solve them. And that's something along the lines of, for example, let's picture an Aiton star that's ghosted, like a ghost Aiton star. it doesn't exist, but if it would, that would be immensely difficult to solve. And or for example, let's say you have higher order ghost cubes that are bandaged, like a 5x5 or a 6x6 ghost cube, but it has certain bandage parts that is kind of like a burr cube or a wall cube. Also, that would be extremely difficult to solve. So those kind of puzzles would be grandmaster level puzzles, in my opinion. So yeah, that's those are my thoughts on puzzle level difficulty. And once again, just my opinion. I know it's a very kind of debatable subject, but yeah, feel free to comment, or if you have any questions, feel free to ask. And thanks for watching. Until next time.